If you blinked or you weren't paying attention in the first place, you might have missed the whole thing, but Sunday's trading session was wild enough that I think we need to go back and at least take a look. Gold put in a new all-time high, and it just kept going and going until it didn't. We saw a pretty crazy run on gold price Sunday evening as Asian trading came online. It put in a new intraday high of $2,152. It's a big number. Monday, though, we saw it drop back to 2023. So despite the cheers and some of that premature speculation, the wild ride fell off. I'm going to get some charts in play here, but this particular one doesn't even show the activity of Sunday evening. Intraday actually looked like this. Gold price shot straight up. It ran from just under the all-time high of $2,074 up to $2,152, something that we'd never seen before. But by Monday morning, calmer heads prevailed, I guess, and the price was running about $130 below, so 2023 range. Okay, so 2023 is still a 4% jump from earlier in November when gold closed around 1940. We see that happening November 10th. And it's up 11% since October's dip to $1,820, a dip that I mentioned being my buying point because that was a 10% fall from the prior local high. You can always see backwards, you can never see forward. So what does it all mean and what caused it? Well, we're going to get into a bit of that, but if nothing else, it means that it might be time to update our expectations. So let's start with what kicked off the run in the first place. Last week, investors became significantly more confident that the Fed was done increasing rates. Investors now are 99.7% sure that we won't see another rate hike. That's according to the CME FedWatch. And that tool isn't a crystal ball, but it tells you a lot about investor sentiment. So they even started putting in some hope for policy reversal in early 2024. That's a slide forward. 58% of investors think that we're going to see lower rates by March. Just a month ago, it was June or July. And so what? Well, lower rates are the move that we've been waiting for because they affect treasury yields and dollar strength, at least presumably. That would cut back on some of the competitive pressure for gold. Now, beyond the guesswork around Fed policy decisions, we have, well, you get to pick your story. I saw a number of geopolitical events being used as reasons to kind of backfill the story of why gold was on the rise, but really, I didn't see any single event that I would have thought would kick off a new run. I would say that it was more of an overall sense, a little bit of everything. And we have to remember that this was Asia's trading session that kicked this off, so we can't look at our own news cycle and pinpoint any one thing. It was probably more of just a peak over the all-time highs that pushed this thing further, your typical pile-on. All-time highs get attention, and things escalated from, I suppose, curiosity to frenzy pretty quickly. Now, it's not quite that simple. The trading desks behind that frenzy, they're not quite as susceptible to whim purchases. Not as susceptible as someone like me. I wasn't counting my coins, updating my math, shopping for Lamborghinis, but it was fun to watch. Now with traders, it's going to be a little bit more professional, but one thing that is basic human behavior is that when something gets to a certain point, you sell. And at $2,152, well, I guess the price was right. And just like we saw the buyers rushing in, we saw the sellers rush out. So let's back up for a minute. 2 months ago, the price of gold was $1,820. So even after the fall this morning, we've seen a run of $210 in 60 days. Now, it looked like we were going to see the bump from the Middle Eastern conflict fall off, but the attention has pretty quickly switched to Fed policy speculation, and what we're seeing here is still very positive movement. And putting in these new all-time highs means that we have test cases for future moves. Now, with that in mind, these calls for $2,100 in 2024 just don't quite seem ambitious enough. I'm already seeing analyst predictions moving into $2,200 territory, and most are saying that we'll see $2,000 being held throughout the year. Now that part's important because it's the sustained price that we should really be watching for, not these 6-hour frenzies. No. None of this says that we're not going to see some drops prior to that happening. Any of the analyst calls that I've seen are targeting Q2 and later, so keep that in mind. So while we were in the heat of it, while that run was happening, I dropped a poll asking where we thought gold price would be in a week, above 2,074 or below it, and with 2,500 votes in, at least last evening, about 2/3 of the responses were voting on above the prior all-time high. And I get it, it was exciting. But again, what we're looking for here is the sustained price. And what was happening last night was just a little premature. Well, my guess is that we're going to see this again as we get closer to an actual pivot. So keeping an eye on price drops might be a little bit more important if you're going to be a gold buyer in 2024. Now, I mentioned recently, I mentioned that $2,000 felt like a high for the Middle East bump. That was a specific conversation with somebody looking to sell. Now, my expectation was that we would dip before getting any real hope of a Fed pause or a Fed pivot. And I was wrong. I was expecting we would see that kind of news hitting in, say, Q3 of 2024. So what was I off by? You could say $152, but nobody would have been able to sell on that spike. So I'm off at least, call it $70 if you were in on Friday, or $25 and counting if you're looking at today. And we still have the rest of December. Maybe we'll see a Santa Claus rally. Now, as for the important part, nothing changes for my 2024 expectation except timing. I still think $2,100 is a pretty easy target. Now I just think it could happen earlier in the year. But I'm not any more sure of any of this than I was a month ago because it's such a strange time for price predictions. So let's call it good there before I get anything too dumb on the record. I'm going to ask the poll question again. Where do you think the price of gold will be by the end of the week? Above the prior all-time high of $2,074 or below it? Let us know. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit the like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you'd like to see more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.